Hey, what's up guys? So today we're going to be talking about The Amazing Spider-Man number 26. I will outright be talking about the comic book itself, so if you haven't read the story and you want to know what happens before you hear me talk about it, probably go ahead and read that story and then come back. Otherwise, if you don't mind following the story through my video, then you're also welcome to do so. But without further ado, let's begin. Alright, so the story begins 9 months ago, and it begins with an interview that Kamala Khan is having to actually get a job working for Oscorp. The interviewer asks her why she wants to work for Oscorp, and she responds with, she's been interested in what Norman has been working on lately, and she wants to learn more about it. Inevitably, her spunk is what drives the man to hire her, and the interviewer warns Kamala that Mr. Osborn moves fast, so you think you can keep up? And she responds with, I promise you, I'll do whatever it takes. Now with our introduction of how Kamala Khan actually got hired, we'll move on to current events. New York City. This takes place at the very beginning of this overall story's arc, where Raven shows up in a tornado form in New York, and then Spider-Man and MJ meet up to figure out what the hell's happening, claiming that the Emissary's back. Raven. Spider-Man asks MJ, where are the kids? And she says, with Paul. Osborn flies in his gold glider and tells MJ, not to worry, Miss Watson. My team is looking after them. Spider-Man looks over at Norman and questions his appearance there. And Norman, of course, responds with, this is our friend from the next universe, over. Yes? If he wants you, he'll have to come through me. No arguments. And MJ's like, who's arguing? We'll take all the help we can get. And a voice out of frame says, glad to hear that. And Miss Marvel makes like this sort of anticlimactic appearance. And she says, because I'm here too. Sorry, that was a little terrible of an entrance. Can we pretend I said something cool? And Spider-Man's mildly shocked, and he's questioning why Miss Marvel's there. But MJ's trying to make a point to the actual situation at hand. Raven. So everyone moves their attention over to him. And inside of his tornado where he's just floating, he starts saying, you plunged the blade of decay into my heart. It brought me death as it does to all things. But I was not afraid of it. I feasted on it. And so the decay took my life, but left a body prepared for a sacred purpose. I am the Black Road, the vessel of Wayep. I will be reborn, the god of death. Now, sort of knowing the backstory of what happened in all this, we know Spider-Man's pretty furious, and so he starts claiming, you ruined my life, Raven. You'll regret coming back to my city. But Raven proceeds at this moment to say, no, this is as it must be. Wayep claws at the body that once held my soul, demanding I complete a ceremony. And I will, so I may be him. Raven sort of shrieks frontal, holding his abdomen, almost as if he were in pain, only to reveal that the Wayep god has now taken over his body, and he proceeds to talk, and says, I will plunge the blade into the red one's heart, and become a god. And as he's saying this, he plunges towards MJ to off her life, so that the whole ceremony is finally complete. But Spider-Man grabs her and moves her out of the way, and Osborn reacts at the same time, smacking into Wayep, while also claiming that he's heard enough. Miss Marvel dittos Osborn's quote and punches Wayep in the face, effectively sending him flying towards a car, having him land in headfirst through a window. Wayep is still in the car when he starts talking and saying, do you think you've caught me unaware? That I haven't prepared this sacred site, infected your wilds with my symbology, my equations couched in glyphs, powerful enough to bring forth life, and life is only the seed of death. And oh, how I hunger for death. Do you see now that your world is mine? And he points towards a dragon that just came out of Central Park in the distance. And if you guys have actually been following the story as I have, this is the very same dragon that is in the other dimension that Peter and MJ were stuck in. And if you did watch my previous video on that comic itself, I did make fun of how goofy that dragon looked. Or I don't think it was the dragon itself that I thought it was goofy. It was like a T-Rex or something, and that I thought it was goofy. But anyways, a dragon pops out of Central Park, and Raven's like, nuh-uh, check out this dragon I got over here. Everyone looks at where he's pointing, and Miss Marvel says, holy crap, somebody should probably deal with that. Spider-Man is kind of clueless, and he's trying to seek Osborn for some help. Osborn on his glider says, on it, keep comms open. As Osborn flies over to deal with the dragon, Spider-Man, Miss Marvel, and MJ are left with Wayep. Wayep continues saying, I see you, Scarlet Woman. I see that you still wear my bindings. MJ responds with, what was that? Wayep continues, your family doesn't belong on this world, not even your precious Paul. Did he tell you where he comes from? who he comes from. Now for the comic readers, these next 2 pages are very confusing because the characters are drawn with completely different colored clothes. So I don't know if these were 2 different periods of time or if this was actually the same period told from different perspectives. I'm clueless, honestly. But it tells the story of Paul and what's up with him. And I'm assuming it starts after issue 25, the previous issue, where Peter's probably left, feeling jealous and he wants to know more about Paul and what's up with him, And so he barges into MJ's home where she's now living with Paul and he's yelling, "Mary Jane!" MJ questions Peter. Paul's like, "The hell?" Paul continues, "If you're here to hit me again, do it. I'm not going to fight you." Peter, after barging in, responds with, "That was a love tap, believe me. That's why you can still walk. I'm not leaving until you tell me who you really are." Paul questions, "Excuse me?" Peter continues, "You told us you worked with Dr. Rabin, so I checked you out. There's no record of you doing that. There's no record of you, period. How was it that you survived for so long on that other world? How did you know so much about Rabin's work?" MJ tries stopping Peter, but it doesn't work. And Peter continues, "You're not from here, are you? That other world is your home, isn't it?" Paul wants to explain, but the first question that Peter has is, "What is your real name, Paul?" And this is where we get some drops. Paul finally reveals his full name, and it's Paul Jeremiah Rabin. Peter angrily questions, "Rabin? Are you hearing this, MJ? This is the bad guy." Paul tells him no, but Peter says, "He's the emissary of this world. He's a murderer, a monster." At that moment, on the next page, the first panel over, where the color of their clothes actually changes, Paul looks like he's had enough and punches Peter in the face. MJ freaks out and tries holding Paul back. Paul tries to correct Peter by saying, "The emissary was my father. I trusted him, helped him do his work, not knowing what he really wanted. And by the time I found out, it was too late. There was no one in my world to save the day. When I saw what he had done, that he had sacrificed our world to his evil, I put an end to him with my own hands. And when you brought another emissary to my world, I did it again. And I followed MJ back to a universe where I was never born. That's why I like it here." Peter says, "Your father, you should have said something. You've been lying this whole time." MJ reveals that no, he hasn't. Not to me. It gets to reveal to Peter for the first time that MJ knew about this. And MJ says, "I know everything about him. I've seen his guilt, his pain. I know that it's a part of what makes him a good man." Sound familiar? Now after this flashback, we do cut back to the current events after Wayep just asked the group if they knew what Paul was all about. And Peter responds with, "We know who Paul is." Wayep starts laughing, because he might be about to drop some interesting details. And after he's done laughing, he reveals that Paul is not the only thing that comes from an emissary's line. "You accepted my bindings, Red One. Bindings that tethered us across time and space. Chains you held close to your heart. Chains that have served their purpose." Now Wayep proceeds to shriek in his own language, essentially casting some sort of spell. At this moment, we move over to the kids and Paul. Owen questions, "Dad, I can hear the scribble man," and Paul's just trying to reassure him, "Don't be silly, Owen. We're safe here." The MJ looking kid, I forgot what her name was, says, "I feel funny, Dad." Clearly they're both scared, so Paul's trying to reassure them by holding them close when they start disappearing from his arms and he's freaking out. After the kids essentially disappear in Paul's arms, we cut over to Wayep again, and he's saying, "Did you see yourselves in them? Did you think it was a sign that you should hold them tightly?" MJ's questioning, "What did you do?" Wayep continues, "I see your face. You know what I did. As I drew the children in the sand, I've wiped them away. I brought your babies home." MJ can't really process the thought of losing her kids, so this makes her insanely angry, and she's out for blood, Wayep's blood. MJ uses the superpowered device that she got from Paul from the other dimension, the one that just shoots randomized things, and she sends Wayep flying. Miss Marvel's amazed by the superpower, but MJ's determined and says, "Rabin is mine." But Spider-Man's trying to reassure MJ by claiming that she's the one Wayep wants, but she's not listening to Spider-Man. MJ wants Wayep's life, but Spider-Man is trying to persist to talk her out of it and says, "No, we've got to be smart about this." A voice out of frame says, "You sure about that, Spider-Man? Why start now?" And it's revealed to be the Fantastic Four flying in to help. After Reed Richards hears that comment from Ben Grimm, he says, "Ben, that's not productive." Now, when the Fantastic Four flew in and made this comment, it's like the writer was definitely reading my mind. after I read what Spider-Man suggested to MJ. I feel like that was a funny nod to the writer literally acknowledging the fact that he purposely makes Spider-Man kind of stupid occasionally, just for the plot to happen. As they land, Spider-Man says, "I appreciate you all for wanting to get your shots in, but we've got a giant monster right over there. Any reason you're here to talking to me?" And he points over to the dragon in the distance that Norman is fighting. Ben Grimm assures that there is a good reason that they're there to talk to Spider-Man, and Reed Richards proceeds by saying, "We wanted to make sure you were okay." Spider-Man has a moment of realization here when the Human Torch continues and says, "Maybe a thank you is more appropriate. Reed whipped up together a flying vehicle just to come help you." Spider-Man says, "I'm sorry I didn't... Look, I've been... Reed stops him there and says, "A good friend. For many years. That's all that matters." Spider-Man is appreciative and says, "Thank you. But, yeah, the giant monster..." Reed says, "We've got it. Go." And Spider-Man proceeds saying, "Great, I'll grab MJ, and where's MJ?" So, in the middle of him talking to the Fantastic Four and them having their moment, MJ's like continuing the fight with Wayep, and she's like getting closer, about to like pound another one on him. So we cut over to both of their interactions. Wayep looks at MJ saying, "The Scarlet Woman faces me alone. Such a good little sacrifice." MJ starts off her power again for a randomized attack and says, "I'm not a good little anything." Open wide, she zaps Wayep with something, but realizing what it is, Wayep says, "Ha! Your symbols add up to a healing light. This is an unreliable weapon." Wayep also acknowledging that MJ's weapon is fucking stupid. Oh god. So inevitably, Wayep grabs MJ by the throat as she freaks out and has the blade up to her and says, "Well, the blade of decay need only make a nick to cull your spirit." And since Miss Marvel is the only one actually paying attention to this fight, she reaches over to Wayep's arm that's holding the blade about to strike MJ and says, "Hey," trying to interrupt that moment, "get away from my friend." Wayep says, "Unhand me." But Miss Marvel's not taking no shit and punches him in the face, effectively building some good distance around him and MJ. Miss Marvel looks at MJ and questions, "We can be friends, right?" Spider-Man says, "That was too close, MJ. Your powers are too unpredictable. You've got to get out of here." MJ says, "Absolutely not. Spider-Man cuts her off and says, if he gets you, he becomes a god, floods the world with blood. Remember? Look, you didn't give me a choice when the shoe was on the other foot." MJ responds with, "You got me there." Miss Marvel questions what she should do to Spider-Man, and Spidey responds with, "If he gets his hands on Mary Jane, this entire world is his. You can't let that happen." Miss Marvel's determined and says, "I won't." Effectively, Miss Marvel is the protector of MJ, as well as the protector of the entire world. So Spidey says, "Go, I'll hold him off." And through Spider-Man's intercom, Osborn is getting in touch with Peter. Osborn says, "This is going to sound crazy, but there's some kind of visual data stream coming out of this thing's mouth." Spider-Man lets him know over the intercom, "Don't let the symbols touch you. The symbols can change your meaning on a quantum level." Osborn questions, "What the hell does that even mean?" Norman effectively does get grabbed by the dragon, only for him to get rescued by the Fantastic Four that just arrived. The Torch sends the thing in like a cannonball towards the dragon's face, and as they're dealing with the dragon, we cut over to Spidey, who's dealing with Wayep. Spider-Man picks up a parking meter as a weapon, and tells Wayep, "You go ahead and get up, but fair warning, I'm gonna sit you right back down." And as Wayep's getting up, he says, "No, Sunblood." Wayep is impatient. "His power grows inside me. I can see the future laid out in snapshots. The Red Woman pierced by my blade, dying in your arms." Spider-Man gets a good grip on the parking meter and says, "You sure? You might want to look closer," as he whacks Wayep in the face with it. He keeps pounding at Wayep with it, and as he's hitting Wayep, Spider-Man says, "To get to her, you have to get through me, and that's not gonna happen." And this is where Wayep tries his fuckery nonsense and says, "Space and time open before me. It already has." And as Wayep's finishing that sentence, he instantly teleports out of that situation with Spider-Man, inevitably causing Spider-Man to go on a frantic search for MJ. Now back to the dragon fight with the Fantastic Four and Norman Osborn. Norman says, Spider-Man says the symbols hold some form of quantum information. Reed Richards says, just like any form of matter. Norman says, "My team is trying to translate them now." But Reed says, "That might not be necessary." Norman questions, "How do you mean?" Reed proceeds by saying, "Languages never die, they evolve. We introduce mutations to the glyphs, we can skip translation and move directly to, and mid-sentence, Reed gets cut off by Sue Storm, and she says, Reed, honey, this is one of those times we've talked about whatever you're explaining, just do it. Reed realizes and says, right, Johnny. Think you can scorch the symbol onto your friend's head? Showing Johnny a symbol that Mr. Fantastic's doing with his hands. Johnny tries memorizing the symbol and says, Reed, you're still the weirdest guy I know. I love it. And flies off to try to burn the symbol on the dragon. As he burns the symbol onto the dragon's forehead, he tells Ben Grimm, Yo, Ben, I think we might be down here. Ben questions, what do you mean? As he's pounding on the dragon's head. As the torch finishes burning the symbol onto the dragon's head, he grabs Ben and flies off and says, not sure, Reed stuff. And it looks like the Fantastic Fours have saved the day by burning a symbol that Reed came up with onto the dragon's head. And the dragon begins to crumble. And instead of getting to safety, MJ's mesmerized by the dragon crumbling in the distance. But Miss Marvel's trying to get her to move, and she's like, Miss Jane, and at that very exact moment, Wayep opens up a portal, attacking MJ, and at the same time saying, come, sacrifice. Miss Marvel effectively does move MJ out of the way, so Wayep does miss. And after moving MJ to a safe-ish spot, she turns around and punches Wayep in the face, leaving Wayep kind of distracted and disoriented. Miss Marvel continuously tries to push MJ to try to get to a safe location. Miss Marvel says, move, I promised your boyfriend. MJ for some reason feels the need to say, Spider-Man is not my boyfriend. And at that exact moment, we see Spider-Man frantically searching for MJ, while also talking to Osborn over the intercoms. And that's when Spider-Man gets the news from Norman saying that the giant is down, Peter. We're doubling back. But as Peter frantically searches, he says, I need eyes on MJ, now. Osborn reassures him and says, we're on it. Now it looks like it's just Miss Marvel and MJ in an alleyway. MJ questions to Miss Marvel, what are you doing? Miss Marvel responds with, he can come from anywhere. We've got to split up. I'll try to distract him. MJ wants to question this, but Miss Marvel says, trust me. Don't stop running. Promise me. MJ says, okay. Now it looks like Miss Marvel wants MJ to just, continue running while Miss Marvel just runs back into the action. As the frantic search continues with Norman and the Fantastic Four, Norman inevitably does spot Mary Jane, and they all start heading towards her location. And we see the silhouette of a figure that looks like Mary Jane who's just running. A portal opens up in front of her and it's Wayep. He says, alone again, sacrifice. MJ looks at him and says, that's fine with me. Let's do this. Wayep says, space and time lay before me. I am behind you, and it is already done. We see MJ's eyes widen up in shock as it gets revealed that she has been impaled by Wayep from behind. Wayep says, it is as I saw it. The sacrifice is made. MJ drops to her knees as Wayep retrieves the blade. Wayep continues by saying, the ceremony is complete, but Spider-Man jumps in at this very moment, drop-kicking Wayep in the neck. Peter holds MJ in his arms, and he's trying to desperately to have MJ talk to him. Wayep, feeling victorious, says, I am become Wayep, the god of scab and bone. This world is mine. He gets cut off by another voice, saying, blasphemous priest, desecrator. Wayep questions, no, I am your loyal servant. I brought you the Scarlet Woman. The other voice is, liar. Wayep yells, no, as his body slowly starts to deteriorate, only leaving his skeleton. We see Peter still holding MJ, and MJ says, got him, huh? Wasn't sure I could still do that. Peter says, Mary Jane, please. A voice out of frame behind him says, Peter? And as Peter turns around to look over, it's revealed to be the entire Fantastic Four group with Norman and MJ? MJ in that group says, Who is that? Peter hears his name calling from the person that he's holding, and it's revealed that it's Miss Marvel. Peter's still holding onto her, and Miss Marvel says, I've been working with Spider-Man. Guess I don't need this anymore. Spider-Man looks down at her and says, Kamala? Oh, God. Kamala continues trying to talk and says, I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry. Not healing. I think something's wrong. Peter says, please stay with me. Kamala questions to Peter, asking, did I do good? And Peter says, Kamala, you did great. You did so good. Hearing this, Miss Marvel tries to get out another sentence, but she can't get it out and passes away in Peter's arms. And everyone's looking down at this event that just happened. Norman says, "That's Kamala? Kamala was Miss Marvel? She wasn't intervening. She was watching me. She was..." Peter finishes his sentence and says, "She was being a hero, because that's what she was." Paul comes up behind MJ, and MJ turns around and questions, "Paul, the kids, are they..." The only thing Paul says is, "No." And MJ starts crying with Paul while at the same time hugging each other. The last page is a full page splash of Spider-Man holding Miss Marvel while everyone else looks in sadness behind them. And that's how that story ends. Now, what do I think about the comic itself? Well, I definitely thought this was a real what the fuck kind of comic. I mean, it wasn't particularly shocking in any kind of way. Things just sorta happened, and that's it. Now, the big lead up, the big death, the big twist, the big hero that falls in this issue, and it's revealed to be Miss Marvel. Now, honestly, that was no mystery to anyone, because if you've been a Spider-Man fan and if you've literally been on the internet at any point the past like 2 weeks, you know who that mystery fallen hero was gonna be, because it literally got leaked. Now, allegedly, from what my understanding is, it was Marvel Editorial who leaked this to try to get more sales on this book, or some sort of relevancy at most, or, you know, whatever they were trying to do. And so they dropped the spoiler. The fallen character was gonna be Miss Marvel. And so, waiting on this book the entire 2 weeks, basically knowing that part of the story, the huge crucial part of the story, I was thinking to myself, okay, well, how does this happen? And why does it happen? And of course, knowing now how and why that happens, it left the book feeling, man, so below average for sure. I liked it for sure, don't get me wrong, because it ends up building the Raven Wayep character a lot more. Like, there's kind of a puzzle with him, and that's probably the only thing I actually found interesting about this comic. With Miss Marvel's death, it was incredibly anticlimactic. As I keep saying, it just happens. They play it as like, oh, she's just being a hero and sacrificing herself, but it's like, okay, you can have her do that for sure, but there is absolutely no build-up or reason for me to actually care about her loss. Like, it just happened. She even had like the most anticlimactic entrance in this comic. Yes, that's part of the Miss Marvel charm, I guess. How she's kind of goofy and more down to earth. But isn't that the point of Spider-Man too? Shit. Probably would have been hella shocking if Spider-Man died in this issue. But no, they killed off Miss Marvel just because. There was no like character build-up whatsoever in any of the previous issues, besides the fact that she worked for Norman Osborn. She sort of saw Peter as kind of like a celebrity with just everything that he, I guess, accomplished in the past, or just the big name Peter was, I guess. And that's about it. I like the fact that Miss Marvel's demise was actually crucial to the story and her protecting MJ. If not, you know, Wayep was just gonna get her, and Wayep literally just obliterates that entire world. And it's game over. That's probably the only redeeming factor. Miss Marvel actually prevented this end-of-the-world scenario, for sure. Absolutely no character build-up between the first issue and this issue. Yeah, she sacrificed herself for this, like, good cause, but was I supposed to care as a reader that follows the story? Was that their intention? Who knows? I definitely did not care. Oh, another part though I did like was her reveal of, I guess, transforming into the appearance of MJ and thus confusing Wayep into believing that she was actually MJ. I don't know what Miss Marvel is actually fully capable of as far as her powers go, but this book has set it in stone that she of course stretches. That's something I did know, but I didn't know that she's able to transform into looking like other people. That leaves questions on the table like, was there at any point in this entire run where she could have masqueraded as another character and I just didn't know it? But that's basically all I have to say about the Ms. Marvel death. It was definitely a very meh ending as a Spider-Man reader. Maybe she has more of a backstory in this particular set of stories with the whole Gold Goblin and whatnot, but as far as just being the Amazing Spider-Man comic reader, this death just comes out of nowhere for sure. And it's very meh. I even remember thinking when the cover of this issue got like revealed, and I looked at all the characters that are displayed there, as you guys can see. Yeah, definitely Miss Marvel is on there, but I was thinking to myself, it doesn't make any sense. She was barely in the story. Why the hell would they kill her off? Nah, of course they kill her off, and it just happens. Maybe if they developed her more of a character, it would have felt more of a sacrifice as a hero. I mean, yeah, she did sacrifice herself to literally save the world, but because of writing, it just felt like it just happened. It wasn't inspiring is what I'm trying to say. Back to Wayep, Raven, like I was saying earlier, he was probably the most interesting character. There's kind of a puzzle with him and like all these voices that are going on in his head. Oh, and how it's actually revealed that Raven is Paul's father from the other dimension where they came from. That was a very interesting detail. Although the build-up to that detail, they were trying to make it seem like Paul himself was Raven, and I was like, you gotta be fucking kidding me, dog. Really? What? But nah, Paul's just a son. Now, as far as MJ and Paul's kids go, yeah, they disappear, but, like, did they actually disappear? It's definitely left up to interpretation, like at the very end. It's not clearly stated. I want to say they didn't disappear and go back to their dimension, but they make it seem like they did by having Paul and MJ crying at the same time. Who knows? Whatever with those kids. As for the Fantastic Four, they still felt out of place. They didn't feel like the Fantastic Four to me. There was definitely some, like, realization here, because of how the Fantastic Four sort of acknowledged Spider-Man as, now he's thinking with his head, you know, as he previously wasn't, with some of the similar comments that I made in the past with, these comics. Spider-Man just doesn't think, and this is the writer saying, yeah, dude, I acknowledge that Spider-Man isn't thinking. Now check out this giant monster in the background. Let's deal with it. That's what I'm getting at with this comic at the moment. They do have their emotional moment where they're trying to just say that they're looking out for Spider-Man, but with previous actions, it just doesn't seem like that. It's also incredibly funny, stupid how MJ is the literal trigger to, like, the end of the world, and she continuously tries confronting Wayep, especially with the weapon that's insanely unreliable. What the fuck? MJ literally heals Wayep during the fight in this, where Wayep acknowledges that her weapon is a complete joke. Lastly, though, there was one other observation I made about the comic, and that was at the very end. Supposedly, it doesn't get brought up, but supposedly over the past, 26 issues, they state that Johnny can't go back into his, like, human sort of appearance. He physically can't. That's why he's constantly just on fire. But at the very end, while everyone's standing in silence while Peter's holding Miss Marvel, Johnny's just standing there with a mustache, like a arc biker mustache. And he's just standing there in human appearance. And no one says anything. Huh? I tell ya, this comic so far, things just happen. But anyways, I appreciate you guys for listening to me talk about this week's Amazing Spider-Man. And if you enjoy listening to me talk about Spider-Man, make sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.